everyone! How are my lemmings? Well, today some more conspiracy psychology part 2, where we get a little deeper into the personality of people who adhere to conspiracy theories. I hope you enjoy. Okay guys, so I hope you are all well. This is part 2 of what will now end up being 3 parts in my conspiracy psychology series. I've been down a few rabbit holes and I hope I've come back out with some solid information for you to all understand what's going on a little better. So there's a few things that conspiracy theorists are more likely to feel. They're more likely to be paranoid and feel distrust for authority. That's no surprise, but it does lead into a number of other things that aren't good for the individual. Also, I mentioned in the last video, they do have a need for control because they don't feel control in their own lives, so they're compensating for it in other ways. And they also feel quite disillusioned, which is no surprise, and they're also very cynical. So that doesn't sound like much fun, does it? When I first got into looking at all this, I started to feel quite sorry for people who believed conspiracy theories, because it doesn't sound like a fun place to be. And I got into quite an ethical conundrum about how I should proceed in the channel. But I also ended up finding out some other interesting things. There is just a stack of negative outcomes that are associated, not necessarily from, because causal arrows are not always clear, but things associated with believing in conspiracy theories are not exactly positive. 3 things that we know for sure are that they're more likely to disengage from political matters, so they're less likely to vote. Another thing that we all know about is they're more likely to be prejudiced against minorities that they see as a threat, and we see that quite clearly with the conspiracies against Jewish people and transgender and all that nonsense. And I mean, the more you talk about this, the more you start to feel like, oh, they're not nice people, but gee, they sound miserable too, and I guess they are. Another one, of course, is if you look at climate change and the conspiracy surrounding that, that means people are more likely to ignore environmental action. They're just going to sit back and go, well, screw that, who cares? And I guess, even though I didn't find research on this specifically, it can leave people to be disengaged from things that are really important, or in the case of anti-vax, be completely opposed to it in an inactive way. The interesting thing about anti-vax conspiracies are that there seems to be the reason why parents fall into this trap quite easily. One of the reasons is because it's a passive thing. So if you screw up by not doing something, it feels like it's a little bit of a bias. It feels like less of a risk than doing something and then it causes harm. So it's about a passive risk, and that's why, part of the reason why that one is so big. Another thing that is common with conspiracy theorists is they have a need to feel knowledgeable and accurate. So this is why we get this Dunning-Kruger thing happening. I'll talk more about Dunning-Kruger in my next upload, but they do pride themselves on feeling very knowledgeable and accurate. That's been shown in research as well. And I think it's important to take a look at the emotional investment as well. So there is research on that feeling of belonging to a group and conspiracy theories. So if you consider all these other negative things that they're feeling in their life and they fall into a group that understands them, of course that is going to strengthen their resolve to stay committed. And even though there was no research I found on this, we're all quite aware that they eat their own if they question, which, you know, it's a toxic environment to be in. They're also more likely to adhere to conspiracy theories if they have had stressful life events or perceive that their lives are stressful. So stress does play a role as well. And as I mentioned last time, belief perseverance. Belief perseverance is all about sticking to your beliefs despite having evidence that quite clearly contradicts, and I just call that being a stubborn asshole. And we all know people in our lives that are like that, but we know that conspiracy theorists are quite often a special case of that. So that's a bit of a summary of some of the things that go into the mix. It's a perfect storm of all these things that go together. The things from last week, the things that I'll do in the following episode, everything kind of comes together, and there's probably even more that I haven't thought of, that haven't been researched. But next I just want to go into a little bit more detail about some really negative stuff that made me feel quite differently about feeling empathy for people who adhere to conspiracy beliefs. So yeah, this is the stuff that got me quite excited. I was quite shocked because even though I sensed this stuff was there, I did hold my judgment until I found this research. So yeah, let's get into that. Okay, so the two research papers that I found that were particularly interesting were about conspiracy theorists with crime and also conspiracy theorists with narcissism. So with this part, I want to highlight that it's really important not to paint everyone you come across in the conspiracy community with the same brush. These findings are not going to apply to everyone you come across, so don't go off calling every conspiracy theorist you find a narcissist and a criminal. Okay, that out of the way. The first one we'll go over is narcissism and conspiracy theorists. So there is no actual scientific experiment on this yet, but there is a correlational study that shows some interesting information. So being a narcissist and being a conspiracy theorist are predictors of each other. It's important to remember that having narcissistic traits and narcissistic personality disorder are two different things. Now, I have no doubt there's a few floating around in the community that are narcissistic personality disordered. Then there's a stack that are selfish shits, but they're not necessarily narcissistic personality disordered. And then you definitely do find people who are not narcissistic at all. So that's important to remember, but there is a relationship there. So more research needs to be done on that. So take that one with a little bit of, intuitively, if we want to chuck the scientific method aside and go, oh, well, so what, there isn't an experiment. It does seem okay to say, well, a lot of them seem to be narcissistic. But I found it quite interesting that there was some evidence to support that hypothesis, and it will be really interesting to see if somebody else does some more research on that. I'm going to link in the description below a video by Dr. Grande, who is a expert in these things, to highlight the difference between someone who has narcissistic traits and who is personality disordered, because I do get a little bit fed up with people who throw that narcissistic label around like it's nothing. And it is worth remembering that you shouldn't be throwing that around willy-nilly if you're referring to personality disordered. They are a special breed. And if you are arguing with someone who is a narcissistic or narcissistic personality disordered, you may as well not bother, just so you know. Now, the other one that was an actual experiment, and I am more confident in its results, is everyday crime, which they define as the likelihood to take advantage of getting refunds at store, and things that are, stealing from an employer, and sort of that kind of, less serious stuff. So they didn't take a look at actual, really hardcore criminals or anything like that. So they are more likely to commit these kinds of acts because they, because of all the things I've previously mentioned, if you think everyone else is out to get you, then you're more likely to go, well, fuck it, I can do it too. So it's an experiment showing that they're more likely to engage in antisocial behaviour, and that's past and future. So they did an experiment where they looked at whether they had in the past and whether they would consider in the future. So the results were quite strong. So that's that, and I guess it's not really a surprise, but once again, don't paint everyone with the same brush on this one. It's a relationship that has been proven to exist. It's not something you can just go and say, well, every person who believes a conspiracy theory is into this, is into antisocial behaviour, or is a narcissist. I think I'm probably repeating myself now, but I just wanted to be really careful about how I presented this information. It's important to me for a number of reasons, but I think after I've had a good look at all of these things that I've mentioned today, I think what the most important thing to take away from all of this is that if you want to talk about flat earthers specifically, when you argue evidence, I think you're just talking about topics, and it's literally not going to make any difference. And I think that the discussion is important, because what we want to do is prevent fence sitters. You're not likely to convert an existing flat earther. Of course it's possible, but I definitely wouldn't go around thinking that you're going to achieve that by saying the right thing or coming up with the right evidence. Yeah, so what I wanted to point out is that that's all about topics. What's at the core of all of this is this paranoia and distrust. And there is evidence to say that people who adhere to conspiracy theories, that's what they're all about. They're all about, it's more important to them to be paranoid and distrusting of the group that they think is deserving or is doing the wrong thing or covering up, or there's it depends on the conspiracy theory. So if you're into flat earth, you're probably into others. If one really interesting thing I think is what filter they use to decide which conspiracy theory is credible and which isn't. That's something that would be really interesting. And I think that's all individual, and it might be a way to talk to them too. It's like, well, how did you decide that flat earth is definitely a thing, but not, I don't know, some other one that they don't believe in? That would be interesting, I think. I think I've said everything I wanted to say today. This was quite a journey for me, this one, because it did make me question about how I did want to proceed with my channel. But yeah, I think that's the big takeaway for me, is that flat earth, anti-vax, whatever crazy conspiracy it is, that's all just the surface. The core issue here is distrust, paranoia, and a set of personality traits and life circumstances and biases that create the perfect storm. I guess, actually one other thing I wanted to mention is, yes, there are mental health diagnoses that are going to make people more likely to believe in conspiracy theories, but it's not necessary. You don't have to have a mental health diagnosis to believe in conspiracy theories, not under the set of rules that make up a diagnosis. That's a really different conversation. If anybody wants more information on that, let me know. We'll chat about it in comments, or I'll do another video on it or something. But what we're talking about here is dysfunction versus diagnosis. That's the way I like to put it. I don't like using the words normal or abnormal, because we're all, normal is so subjective. Nobody's normal. So I like to say dysfunction, diagnosis, or, well, that's it really, because I'm telling you, nobody's completely clean of any dysfunction, and that's what makes us human beings. It's what makes us individuals. I feel like I'm rambling, but I hope that's starting to bring it all together for you guys. Next time I'm going to get into a few odds and ends that I found, a few fallacies, a few other ways these things come about. If you have any questions that could help direct my next episode, then chuck them in the comments and I'll see what I can do. It has been hard for me to figure out what to include and what not to include. So that's it for today, and be nice or be mean, whatever you think is appropriate for the situation. I'd say respect when respect is given, and disrespect when disrespect is given. And so if you're enjoying this series, please subscribe and comment. and like too. I really am enjoying my my uploads. So I'll catch you all for part 3, and have a good day. Bye guys.